Sauce.
Sauce.
Fresh sauce.
Yeah. I need the cheese. Cheese, please.
Nothing like fresh sauce.
Okay, so we're gonna go over the ingredients for the tomato sauce. I have 3 large cans of kitchen-ready tomatoes, so you can use any brand you want. I also have 3 cans of tomato paste. The rule is for every can of crushed tomatoes, you have 1 can of paste. All right, I also have salt, pepper, and garlic. I also put a little sugar. I usually put 1 teaspoon of sugar in each can of crushed tomatoes. And I have 1 large onion that I chop. So that's all the ingredients for just the tomato sauce. The meat I'm going to do separately. All right, so I'm just gonna chop my onion. All right, so like in my other video, this is how I chop onions. So I cut off the tip of the onion, and the stem of the onion, I just cut off a little bit of it so it can lie flat, but I don't want to cut the stem all the way through. Also, usually take off the outer skin of the onion. All right, so I use sweet Vidalia onions or sweet onions. You can use a yellow onion if you want, but I tend to use the sweet onions. So I just cut it in half. All right, so you have the stem, and here's the root. So I'm gonna cut towards the root of my onion, and then just chop this down below. So I also like to get my tomato paste out of the cans. I just find it helps me to get that ready ahead of time, and I usually put it in a Pyrex measuring cup. So 3 cans of paste usually will almost fill up a 2-cup Pyrex measuring cup. I also like to wash the covers of my cans. Okay, so that's looks like a lot of paste, but that's how much we're gonna use for the 3 cans of crushed tomatoes. Okay, so I'm gonna start opening my cans of tomatoes. So I said kitchen ready, but they're really just crushed tomatoes. So like I said, in the ingredients, I do add 1 teaspoon of sugar to each can of crushed tomatoes. You don't have to add the sugar, just a habit I got into, and I like the way my sauce tastes. Okay, so I have the ingredients for my meatballs. I use about 3 pounds of the 85% ground beef. You can use the 90 or 93% ground beef if you can find that. I just find the 85 gives it a lot of flavor. I also have 3 eggs. So it's usually 1 egg per pound. So I have pretty close to 3 pounds, so I'm using 3 eggs. I have 1 cup of milk, and the breadcrumbs, I have close to a cup here, but I'm gonna see how my mixture looks and feels. I might not use all of it, or I might need more. That's part of cooking. You start to adjust to what you like. I also have salt and pepper that I'm gonna add, probably about half a teaspoon of each. And I also have some garlic powder that I'm gonna add to my meatballs. And even though the breads are seasoned, I'm going to add a little bit of dried basil and parsley. If you have fresh, of course, that's the best. All right, so we're gonna mix those together to make our meatballs. All right, the first step, usually you need a pretty strong wooden spoon or utensil. You can do this all with your hands. If you're not an experienced cook, I could see how that would bother you, and also dealing with all of these ingredients as well. So the first step, I'm going to add some of my moisture to my meat. So I'm going to add the eggs. All right, this is why it's nice to have a utensil so you don't have to put your hands in the eggs. All right, mix that in a little bit. I'm going to start adding my milk. Now the milk helps cook the meatballs and keep them tender. All right, so you have milk and eggs. And then I'm going to start adding my dry ingredients. All right, so I do want to incorporate that pretty well. I will be using my hands in a few minutes, but I'm going to let my spoon help me here. All right, and here's my breadcrumbs. I'm going to add about half of them. I'm going to add my salt and pepper and garlic powder, and then my dried herbs. All right, this will make quite a few meatballs. So I call this my large sauce. This is going to make quite a bit of sauce and meat. I usually break it up into different containers and I freeze my sauce. I give my sauce away to friends, and it's work, but it makes a lot of meals, especially when I don't have time to cook. I know I have this in the freezer. Okay, so my meat is starting to feel like it's getting tight, so I'm going to add some more. What I mean by that, it's hard to stir. So I'm going to add the rest of my milk. I'm going to add the rest of my breadcrumbs. And pretty soon I'm going to have to use my hands because it's hard to tell if this is okay until I see how it's doing with my hands. This bowl could be bigger. I just wanted you to see everything. All right, so obviously you have to have clean hands. I take my rings off. All right. And I really want to get in there and mix this mixture. I want it to be uniform. And when the hamburger is right out of the refrigerator, it is hard to keep your hands in here. So I do let my hamburger stand on the counter for 30 minutes sometimes, because when it's ice cold, it bothers my hands. So, and that 1 cup of milk and 1 cup of breadcrumbs seems to be pretty good. I want it to feel soft. All right, so you don't want it to feel like it's dry, and you certainly don't want it to feel like it's got too much moisture. So that comes with practice. All right, you start to learn what you like. Okay, so I'm going to start making my meatballs. I use a cookie sheet, and I've started using the silicone liner for my pans instead of the aluminum foil. So that's just a preference I have. You don't have to use one of these. All right, and also when you make your meatballs, it does help if your hands are a little wet. So I tend to keep a bowl of water nearby, and I wet my hands before I start rolling my meatballs. All right, and when I make meatballs, I tend to pick up a good size amount. Now this is the size I like for my sauce. If I was bringing meat and sauce to a party for meatball subs, I'd make them smaller, but this is for my spaghetti sauce. All right, so I'll just do a couple. I think this is going to fill this pan. All right, so you can see that we made about 30 meatballs, and they're a good size. I'm going to cook these under my broiler for about 5 to 7 minutes, and that's just to get some browning. I'm not cooking them all the way through. It's just to get some of the fat and juices that cook off early out of the meat, and it helps your sauce have a cleaner taste, and it's the way I like to do it. All right, so besides the 3 pounds of ground beef for the meatballs, I also use sweet Italian sausage links. I'm going to broil these in the oven, just like the meatballs. And then I also use a country style pork rib, or like a spare ribs. This is optional, you don't have to use this, but I really like the bone-in country style ribs. And I feel like the bone actually adds a lot of sweetness and flavor to my sauce. So it's one of my favorite parts of my sauce. So this is optional. I do have to clean it. I have it on a paper towel right now. I'm wiping off any of the excess moisture because I do have to prepare this for the broiler. Alright, so for whatever reason, when they sell these, a lot of times they don't cut them all the way through. So I do have to find where the bone is. All right, so the first part that I like to clean is I want to make sure I cut that bone. So you can see how it's almost like a pork chop in here. I'm hoping the fat comes with it. I mean, you don't need to get rid of all of the fat, but you end up with a pretty nice piece of pork. All right, this I'm going to cut into pieces. I'm not going to put it into my sauce that big. All right, and if the pieces are too thick, like I feel like this is too big, I am going to cut it in half. So these are all going to get broiled for about 5 minutes. Okay, I can cut this little tenderloin off. That looks like it would be good, and has some fat. Right, so I'm going to get rid of all that fat. Put this here. All right, so if you keep them too thick, they just don't cook the same way. All right, so I'm going to get rid of that. A nice tenderloin here. Okay, try to get rid of some of that fat. So you can see how much fat I've cleaned away from those chops. All right, I'm going to cut this in half. Cut it up. And ideally, I'd like them to not touch each other on the pan, but you have a lot of meat here. This piece is big too. Right. I'm gonna have to scooch everybody in here. So you don't have to be perfect, but I get very happy when I find these pieces of pork in the sauce. Imagine if all that fat was in your sauce. It would be really greasy. You shouldn't have to skim the oil off your sauce. I remember watching my grandmother and my mom cook. That was something I think they did because I think they put their meat in really fatty. So years ago, people didn't worry about fat. But all right, so this is my second pan of meat. It's going to join my meatballs in the broiler, and I'll show you that in a second. Okay, so I'm going to preheat my oven and I'm going to put it on broil. All right, I'm going to just keep it at 500. 550 would be a little too smoky. My meat in the oven, I'm going to start with my meatballs first. I'm going to put them on the top. All right, and so my pork is going to go at the same time. All right. And I'm going to time this one, especially for the meatballs, just at 5 minutes because I know being so close to the broiler, they're going to cook pretty fast. Okay, so I'm going to check my meat. All right, so it's been boiling for about 4 minutes, and that's pretty much what I want the meat to look like. I don't want it to be cooked all the way through. Right, they are still kind of delicate here, but I do want some browning on the top. So I'm going to actually put the pork up near the broiler. All right, you can see those hardly anything. All right, set my timer for 5 minutes. All right, so while they're going, now my meatballs are nowhere near cooked and they're pretty tender. All right, so I want to be careful when I turn them over. All right, so if you put too much egg, too much milk, and they're not really well rolled, the meat could fall apart. So if you find your meat falls apart, then you probably added too much milk, not enough breadcrumbs. Okay. Okay, so I want to cook them on the other side. All right. All right, so I've turned over all of my meatballs. Let me put the camera a little bit closer. All right, my sausages and pork are still in the broiler. So again, you want to be careful with that. All right, so I've taken out the pork after 3 or 4 minutes, and you can see the pork has cooked almost all the way through. So I don't want this to dry out, right? So I'm just going to turn them over. Okay, so I put my meatballs back in. Hopefully they'll get cooking. The ribs are just about cooked the way I want them to. I don't want them to dry out. Here's the bone. They are going to certainly cook in the sauce. Okay, so I've gone through all of my pieces of pork and I pulled out the pieces that I feel are cooked, and the ones that I want to put back onto the broiler, I made sure I turn them over. And I just want to point out how much of the fat and things you really don't want in your sauce have come out in this process. So some people put their meat in their sauce raw, and you know, my preference is to not do that. I like to broil my meat first, get rid of some of this, and I feel it gives my sauce a cleaner, sweeter taste. All right, but again, family preference. You cook what your family likes. All right, I'm going to check my pork again. Much better. Meatballs on the top. Let them brown on that side. All right, so I definitely feel I did the right thing. Putting them in for a few more minutes. I feel like my sausages got a little bit of a color on them. Right, they're not cooked all the way through. That's definitely not the point of it. Just to get rid of a lot of the extra fat. All right, I'm going to check my meatballs. There we go. Okay, those look good. Okay, so again, I don't want them cooked all the way through, I just want them browned. So what I'm going to do is, I'm a little more careful when I'm taking my meatballs off the heat. Now if you have your act together, you'd already have your sauce cooking. So in the meantime, you can saute your onions and garlic and get your tomato paste cooking. And look at how much of the fat has come off my meatballs. All right, so all of that grease would have been in my sauce. Okay, so now we're going to start cooking our sauce. So I don't have a big enough pan to do this all in one pan, so I'm going to use two smaller 4-quart, didn't like that, 4-quart pans. All right, so I'm using my countertop cooker. We'll see how this works. So we're going to add our oil. So I've already preheated these pans. Add my olive oil. I have that 1 onion, so I'm going to split that onion into 2. So if you're only doing 1 pan, probably about half a teaspoon in each. And pepper. All right, I'm going to put my garlic in. So again, I have 2 tablespoons of garlic. And again, when the garlic is diced this small, it cooks fairly quickly. Now the next thing I do is I cook and I saute my tomato paste first. All right, so your tomato paste, you have it all ready. Try to split this in half as best I can. This is 3 cans of tomato paste. And I said, well, why do you have to saute the tomato paste? The tomato paste is, all it is condensed tomatoes. So it's a really dense mixture of flavor, and cooking it a little bit, I'm gonna add a little oil. Cooking it a little bit just gets some of the bitterness out of it. Okay, so I'm letting that saute down. So I'll add water a little bit at a time, and I tend to rinse out my tomato paste cans. All right, this is how I can tell how much water I'm adding to. So I tend to do it 1 can at a time. All right, so this stuff can get very angry and splatter you, and you can get burned, so be careful. Tend to flatten it out to see how it's doing. It's not really bubbling yet. It's starting to bubble over here. So once I start to see a bubble, I get more water ready. All right, so let this one alone. This one's starting to cook a little bit. Keep stirring. All right, so I've added about 3 cans, tomato paste cans of water to each pot. So that's all the water I'm going to add for my tomato paste. Once I start to see the tomato paste start to cook, then it's time to add the crushed tomatoes. Now you can also add more salt and pepper to your sauce. You can add whatever seasonings you like. If you like a spicy sauce, you can add some red pepper, some cayenne pepper. I've been splattered with this, so that's why I'm being careful. There it goes. Okay, I'm gonna add my tomatoes. This one's catching now. So I'm adding my tomatoes to this one. All right, so I'm going to mix this up, get that sugar in there, because I have to split this. half here. And the other one right here. Alright, so I added 3 cans of water from the tomato paste can. That's about 1.5 cups of water in each one of these. But I'm also going to add some more water so I can rinse out my crushed tomato cans. Alright, this is just the way I was taught how to do it. What I like to do is I filled up 1 can halfway and I'm just rinsing the cans out back and forth. That's all. Alright, so you can go crazy with this, but that's what I saw my grandmother doing and my mom doing. So that's what I'm going to do. Alright, so this is about 1/2 can. So what is this? A 28 ounce, so it's probably about another 1.5 cups of water. Alright, so in all I'd say you probably add at least 2 cups of water to each pan. I'll have to check my math. Alright, so I'm going to put half of it in here and half of it in here. So now my cans are all clean. So I want my sauce to warm up because I'm going to add the meat to them and then I'm going to let it go. I'll leave it alone, bring it to a boil. Again, a simmer, I should say, not a boil. And again, just like my beef stew recipe, you want to scrape from the bottom because once you put the meat in here, you don't want to be breaking up the meat stirring your sauce. Alright, so my sauce is starting to bubble a little bit. Alright, so I'm going to start adding my meat. You can add the meatballs first or the sausages, doesn't matter. So I try to split the sausages. So 6 sausages, so 3 each. And my pork bones, I try to get the same number of pork bones in both pans. Right. And then the rest of my pork pieces. You can see there's a lot of meat. Right? You don't have to cook this much meat in your sauce. Right. But we all enjoy the meatballs and the sausages. So, okay, so mix the pork in. Again, I'm scraping the bottom of the pan.
How'd you do?
Good. Good cooking.
You think the sauce came out good?
I hope so.